Today we are joined by the fantastic Gwen Parrott. Hi Gwen.
Hi there.
So if you could tell us a little bit about your books, that would be fantastic.
I write two series. My first series is set around about 1947, at the end of the Second World War. And I have one main detective, amateur detective. She's called Della Arthur, and she is the headmistress of a small country school in a very isolated village in North Pembrokeshire. The second series I write is quite different. It's a contemporary series set in the fictional town of Mae, where the main detective, again amateur, changes with every book. So the town is your basic premise, and there are a couple of characters that come up in every book, but basically it's a change of cast for each one, which isn't true for the historical ones where Della, my protagonist, goes right through. She is always the detective. And I write two series because I don't want to get fed up of either one of them, so that I can chop and change and refresh myself between each set of books.
I was going to ask you actually whether, because your two series are quite different, do you have clear plots? What sort of method you use when you're writing or before you're writing?
Well, my methods make me sound insane, because basically I can't do ad hoc murder writing. I can't start with a blank page and let it go. So basically what I do is I talk to myself for something like 30 or 40,000 words, basically asking questions. Will this work? How about this? Where does she go from here? You know, it's basically a conversation with myself. And when I feel that I have reached a point with the book that I've actually got some structure, that I have got my ideas together to the point where I can structure them, then I start with chapter 1, and then I will do a synopsis. And I will go down through the notes I've written and split them into chapters. Now, this normally lasts until about 3/4 of the way through the book. So when I've reached the 3/4 point and I can't stand it any longer and I have to start writing, which I do, I will then have to go back and redo notes because I haven't planned the last quarter properly. And so sometimes I think, why can't I just keep on going with the plotting until I've actually finished the book? But the pressure gets too great, you know, so stressful, so stressful. That's how it works for me. Other people seem to be able to start with a blank page and go straight through and do the whole book. Other people are even more obsessional than I am, and they have little tiny cards with people's eye colour on it. I can't do that either. So that's how I work. We are all different. We are all strange. Yeah.
Do you use a computer or do you handwrite things?
I handwrote for years. But when laptops and little diddly computers came, you know, available to buy, I invested. And that's made a huge difference. Really, writing by hand. I know a lot of authors still like to do a lot of it by hand. But basically, you're just typing stuff out. If you've written by hand, you've got to redo it. Whereas the beauty of onto the computer is you can change it as you wish, and it's there. So yes, everything is done on the computer now.
Yeah. That's a fascinating method. That's how you do it, and you have to sort of hold yourself back. You're so excited to get stuck in there. I think that's fantastic. Do you spend a long time researching your books, and do you ever use your local library?
I have done. I have used more of the general, you know, the big library, the big central library in the centre of Bristol, possibly because they have specialist librarians, which has been helpful. You know, when you write historical stuff, it's the devil is in the detail. And I don't know if you know this, but rations, you could only buy so many different foods, they varied from month to month. So you daren't, I mean, I don't suppose anybody would care or mind, but I mind. If you say, oh, in August 1947, you were allowed to buy 4 ounces of cheese a week. Well, you might not have been, because it could have been 2 ounces that week. It's that sort of detail. And what librarians can do is point you in the right direction. And that's very helpful, because you can be searching and searching and searching forevermore for minute details, that perhaps don't matter to anybody but you do want to get it right.
Yes, of course, I completely understand that. And I think that's the beauty of your book, Dead White, especially, is you get so engrossed in that detail, and there is such a strong sense of place within it. How much of growing up in Pembrokeshire has sort of influenced and made it into that book especially?
Everything. What people don't realise, I suppose, is that the village I was brought up in Pembrokeshire, didn't have electricity until 1960. Right. So when I was a child there in the late 60s, the electricity kept going off. And we did have huge amounts of snow, incredible amounts of snow, where we would be completely cut off. So my experiences as a child in those circumstances absolutely inform Dead White. And when I speak about my childhood to people here who've always been brought up in the city, they're quite incredulous that I can prime an oil lamp. We always keep candles in the house. It's because I'm used to the electricity going off. Yeah, I know what it is to live without it. I know what it is to be completely trapped for weeks on end in heavy snow. So it totally informs Dead White. If I hadn't had that childhood, there would have been no book.
I can't even imagine the amount of snow that you're talking about, really.
Well, you're talking about, in Pembrokeshire, I don't know if you know this, but they have these huge high hedges, very thick hedges. And the lane that we lived down, the hedges were about 7 or 8 feet tall, and the snow was at the top of the hedges. So you had to dig your way out. And the only way you could get anywhere was by walking on top of the hedge, if you could actually find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the level at which, at which Della has to, that's the level she has to cope with at the beginning of Dead White.
Mm.
It's snow like we've never seen here in the cities.
Yes.
I don't remember ever seeing snow like it before or since. And it's been so valuable. I wouldn't give up that background for all the tea in China. It's so valuable because I've lived in situations, and I mean, I know I was protected because I was a child, but I've lived in situations that so many people now have no idea at all, not a clue. What? Can't turn the light on, So
yeah. And in Dead White especially, there are lots of references and different dialects and things like that, and you translate your own books from Welsh to English. Can you talk us through that process and the pitfalls or the benefits of that?
See, I don't understand why everybody doesn't do it. But then, okay, I worked as a translator for 25 years, so maybe I have a head start, right? When I was translating, to give you some idea, your big problem as a translator is to get inside the head of the original author. What do they actually want to say? What are they trying to say here? Well, if you're the original author there's no problem. That problem has disappeared. You know what you meant to say. Right? The downside is that you spot mistakes. You spot things that you should have said differently or done differently or explained differently. Ideally, doesn't often happen. Ideally, I would like to translate before I publish the original, because I tend now, 7 novels on, to use it as a form of editing. I use it to spot where I've gone wrong in the original, because I am a rubbish editor. I really am hopeless. I get engrossed in the story, and so I don't see typos and what have you. But when you translate, you're using a different part of your brain, and you're looking at the words. You're looking to see whether you've used some phrase too many times, or whether you've explained something before. And that's the beauty of translation, is that it allows you to edit. So I am all for translating your own work. I feel it helps me, and it helps make the books better. So I will continue to do it.
Fantastic. Do you ever come across sort of Welsh phrases or anything like that you get stumped and think, how do I convey this into English?
Yeah, there is that. But more than that, particularly in the historical detective series, are things that Welsh people are absolutely familiar with, that their bread and butter. Things, for example, like the Gyman Vagani, the singing festivals they have, right? You translate that into English, right? If you're aiming for a readership in England, you are going to have to explain what that is.
Yeah.
And particularly in historical settings where people were big chapel goers, and they did a lot with the chapel, and they had all these different meetings during the year, the Whitsun meetings and all the rest of it. You have to explain what these are when you translate into English. You don't have to in Welsh. Welsh speakers know what you're talking about. But English speakers, you can't risk it. And then your problem is, how much do you explain? Do you really need to go into huge detail? Is it just enough to say singing festival or Whitsun meetings?
Yeah, that's very true. I've never really thought of it like that. It is like you said, that blank page, getting started. But yeah, like you said, the finishing, the end part is tricky.
And as I told you before, I have problems with finishing. I have problems with the end part. I'm very happy to reach 75% of the novel. It's the last 25%.
Yeah.
That takes the sweat. But yeah. So it never goes away.
No. You mentioned sort of people watching and observation, and do you do a lot of that? Is that something that you enjoy?
Oh God, yeah. Yes. I don't know whether I am just naturally nosy. Probably I am. Yes. But yes, people are endlessly fascinating, and I don't really know if you can be a creative writer without finding people interesting, and thinking about them and analysing why have they chosen that particular look, analysing why have they chosen to do that particular thing. It's a constant process. Keeps me going.
Yeah. How have you found, obviously, the last 18 months and lockdown and things, if you find people so fascinating and that really sort of is part of your creative process, really?
Well, I write out in the garden.
Okay.
Right. And we've got a little section in the garden. Our garden isn't private at all, except for this one little tiny piece with a fence one side of me and bushes behind me and a great big buddleia in front of me. So I'm tucked right in. Now the fence to the side of me is next to the road. What I have heard in my little bower writing, you wouldn't believe what I've heard. I could write novels on people's conversations coming down the road, you know. And I think to myself, are you eavesdropping? Well, yes, you are. Then I am in my garden, you know, I'm entitled to be there. There have been some conversations that I have heard that basically I could write you an essay on the person's private life.
Wow.
Yes, yeah. Because people don't have that inhibition anymore about talking on their phones at the tops of their voices, for which I'm very glad.
Yes.
Because where would I be if they were all, you know, terribly private and whispering behind their hands? So, yeah, so that's basically what's kept me going. It's sort of interacting with the public without them knowing that I'm there. So, yeah, but you find ways. And of course, you can always, I haven't found lockdown to be terrible. I have to admit, I know a lot of people have. They've had an awful time. But I haven't, because I suppose I live so much in my head. And in some respects, it's been rather nice that I'm not allowed. I haven't been allowed to go out. I haven't been allowed to do stuff. So then that kind of concentrates the mind, right? What am I going to do instead?
Yes, yeah. Is there another book in the pipeline, Gwen?
Yes, there is. There's nearly always another book. So far, fingers crossed. Yes, I'm working on a fourth Della Arthur, the historical ones.
Oh, so fantastic.
It goes on. And I have a kind of idea for a lockdown novel in the contemporary series, but whether that'll work or not is, you know, I'm keeping it at a distance. Because, you know, that's the problem. You know, you start on one thing and then other ideas immediately start for other books start coming into your head and you get distracted. So I'm deliberately not thinking about this contemporary one set in the lockdown era. I'm keeping myself strictly to the historical at the moment.
Oh, fantastic. I look forward to that. I mean, with so many sort of books being published and crime books, how do you go about making yours stand out? What are the key things for you?
I suppose for the historical setting, it's the fact that it's a very unusual historical setting, in the sense that you've got your really isolated village, but she doesn't stay there. She moves around, but it's the whole old Wales, the way that people thought, and people think differently now, and how they acted and how they behaved, and the limitations of their lives, which have changed beyond all measure. And something that an author friend of mine said, she said he had never, after he read Dead White, that he found the poverty shocking, which I hadn't thought about at all, if I'm honest, because it would have been such a part of everyday life. But he did find the poverty shocking, and I'm very appreciative of that kind of remark, because it shows that people are seeing things in the books and it's affecting them, and that they're thinking about it, which I may not have seen.
Yeah.
The contemporary series, it's for people who like a change. They like modern life, and they like the fact that it's all in one town, and you get to know so many different people in the town through the books, and they pop up. A bit like Alfred Hitchcock used to do in his films, you know. Old characters just pop up or are mentioned. And I think I like doing that, because it gives you a sense of cohesion and continuity, and that the town, even though it doesn't exist, that it has a life, it has a history and a life. And I suppose that's why I like to do it. I do the historical ones when I can think of something that Della Arthur is likely to have done back in the day, and then I kind of refresh myself with the modern ones where people have got mobile phones, for goodness sake, and they can contact each other. Because if Della Arthur has to go into one more phone box to contact anybody at all, you know, that the limitations of a historical series can get very frustrating in a detective novel, because you have to think, you know that people couldn't contact other people. And that's actually quite an important part of a detective novel. Yes. So anyway, so it's that sort of thing. It's to keep the two sides going and to make them both as genuine and as interesting as I possibly can.
Fantastic. I mean, that premise of having different characters popping up throughout, it sort of lends itself to, there's a whole other life or universe that is carrying on beyond the pages. Exactly.
You've got it. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And it makes it, I'm a great fan of the real. Keep it real. And so people's lives carry on, because that's the thing with detective novels. Sometimes what's happened in a given novel, you think nobody could possibly get over that, you know.
Yeah.
But life carries on.
Yes. Yeah. When you're not writing, Gwen, what books do you enjoy reading?
I enjoy crime novels.
Okay.
Yeah. And I always have. I also read a lot of travel books, particularly during the lockdown, because if I couldn't be there, then at least I could read about it.
Yes. Yeah.
And even though it's very much a part of writing historical fiction, I'm very keen on social history. And I always have been. And I'm particularly around pre-war, during the war, post-war. And things like mass observation. I don't know if you've heard of them, that they sent out people to listen in pubs and to listen in workplaces, and they got people to write diaries and what have you. A lot of books have now been published about that, you know, those diaries and the findings of mass observation. I find those so interesting and also very useful, because they are the real words of real people at the time that I'm interested in. So those are the sorts of things that I generally read. But basically, you know, I'd read the back of a cornflake packet. I'll read anything, mostly. But I have my favourites.
Yeah, the mass observation books you're talking about, it just made me think of you behind your fence. That is, you know, it's a similar sort of thing, isn't it?
I'm doing my own mass observation.
Yes, yeah, behind the fence. Well, thank you ever so much, Gwen, for talking to us today. We can't wait to see the books that you're currently working on, and perhaps that lockdown novel as well. So yeah, thank you ever so much.
Well, thank you.